You're now watching Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.
All right, Jimmy Ott, Paul Stone talking about college football in the high-profile games, the games that everybody's going to be watching. So, I mean, looking at the ones you're probably going to want to put a little bit money on. Let's start at the big one. Well, it's Texas and Georgia. So, number one, Texas hosting Georgia. Georgia, Paul, back in the summer was a slight favorite, I believe, in this game. And, Georgia's defense has shown a few kinks against Alabama. But how much of those points and yards, kind of semi-garbage time last week at the Battle of the Dogs between the hedges, was Mississippi State. A little bit of looking ahead to Georgia. And, boy, you got Texas, who looks great. But who have they played? I don't think there's anybody on their schedule that's going to finish in the top 25 at this point. I just can't see Michigan, who's currently there, that's going to finish in the top 25. And Georgia is an underdog for the first time in 50 games or so. Since 2020, COVID year, that year at Alabama, Stetson Bennett threw multiple second-half interceptions, and that tie game stretched out to a double-digit Bama win. They won a couple of national championships along the way, and they're underdogs in respect. They don't respect us. They don't respect nobody. Thought we could ever do it. Georgia's finally got that room service to them on the platter here. Hey, the quarterback's found his weapons. There's no doubt about that. But you worried that this Georgia defense, remember how we don't overreact to ugly offense? Man, would Clemson get shut down right now if they play Georgia's defense again? Maybe not in that first week of the season. Texas can't do any better, look any better than the team than what they have, even though the schedule has been really weak. Texas is 3.5, 56.5, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, Texas has arguably been one of the nation's most complete teams with no glaring weaknesses to speak of. But like you ask, it's fair to say and ask yourself, who have the Longhorns played? I mean, they won at Michigan. They beat Oklahoma on a neutral this past weekend at the Cotton Bowl in that annual matchup. But both those blue bloods clearly below their, typical standard. And you've got a Georgia team, and I'm sure Kirby Smart is preaching this. We've won 2 of the last 3 national championships. We're 47-3 our last 50 games, and we're the underdog. I'm sure he's, preaching that us against the world mentality and that nobody gives us respect card, as you mentioned. But the Dogs, I mean, it's fair to say as well, while Texas hasn't beaten anybody but done everything they could to this point, Georgia's kind of been, mere mortals to this point. Their offense, even though they've identified some playmakers, are still probably not quite as prolific at the receiver positions. Their defense, as great as it's been the last 3 or 4 years, it's slipped maybe just a notch. So, maybe they're not quite the same team. They've already lost at Alabama by 7 in the frantic comeback. And the week before that, they survived in Lexington against Kentucky, only winning by a point, I believe, 13-12. But, this is an interesting game from a handicapping standpoint, really what we as handicappers like, in that it's what I call a pure handicap. There's not going to be any letdown spot or anything like that. Both teams are going to bring their full collective team psyche. All hands are going to be on deck, so to speak. I made the number 3.5. I think 3.5 is the right number. I think it's a good number. And due to this game's lofty stature, I will say this game's probably no secret here, but it's probably going to be the most highly bet game of any game of the week based on the just the importance of it and the just all the publicity surrounding it. So you might see 3 if you want to take Texas. You might see 4. If you want to take Georgia. So as of now, I'm kind of sitting out and watching. If it drops to 3, though, I will take Texas at -3.
And all due respect to Vanderbilt, I mean, that's not exactly still a tough road game. They just played one of their road games. It was a neutral site in Dallas. So we talked about this beforehand. It has played out exactly that way. I mean, Michigan's, passing yards per game is at 115 a game. 261 in college football. Well, there's only 135 Division I teams, so they're behind a lot of other teams as well. So, I mean, that's what. But Georgia's got the big question there. Losing McConkey, losing Bowers. Man, they found it. He's found some weapons. He's throwing the ball and he's throwing for a lot. Just wonder if that super exciting game in Tuscaloosa one against two teams that maybe just aren't as good as they usually are. One thing about it, this Georgia defense never gives up yardage and points like they've done already in a couple of games, no matter if it's in semi-garbage time, actual time, whatever it is. So this is a little bit different, and it's hard to maintain that elite, super elite level of personnel each and every year. But, man, they got a room service and motivation in this one, being underdog for the first time in 50 games. This is a tough one. I'm still trying to formulate my opinion on it. Texas, this is the one that's circled, especially with their schedule, too, not being so tough that, this is by far the toughest roster that they'll play. Now, that trip to College Station at the end of the year is shaping up to be a tough one, where it is against that team who is on the improve under the first-year head coach Elko. But this is the toughest roster that they will play. We'll see. Texas 3.5. And yours is fine. He shook off the rust. That was his rust game. That was very smart by Sark to get him in there, shake that rust off in the first quarter, and then kind of get going the rest of the game. And Oklahoma's not good, but Oklahoma's got a pretty good defense. And they certainly were geared up to play that game in Dallas. All right, so Texas 3.5, 56.5 over Georgia. Michigan 3.5 and 43.5 at Champaign against Illinois. Michigan, after the trip to Seattle, has a bye week. They are both ranked 4-2 Michigan and 5-1 Illinois. Illinois with upsets against Kansas and at Nebraska on that Friday night. They lost the game they were scheduled to lose at Penn State. And talking about Illinois' offense, it concerns me a little bit in that by far their toughest defense that they played, and Michigan's got a similar defense to Penn State. They only had 219 yards at Happy Valley. So Altmaier's been really good. Illinois here at home catching points. I'm almost surprised that Illinois is not a slight favorite here, Paul. I like the Illini. Give me points and a pick'em game. They're always going to be up to play Michigan. They've been very close. They certainly were close the last time they played here. We'll see, but I like the Illini plus any kind of points. Now 3.5 at Bet Rivers.
Yeah, I made this game actually pick, so I'm with you there, Jimmy, on the line. Michigan at some books on Sunday opened as -1, but they've clearly taken the early money, have the Wolverines now up to 3.5 here at Bet Rivers. And I would maintain that the market's collective response is largely based on Illinois' near collapse or near loss to Purdue in Champaign this past weekend. That was a Purdue team that still hasn't beaten an FBS team all year. Illinois was favored by 3 touchdowns, and they were up 21 points at halftime, and then the wheels kind of came off in the second half, squandered that lead. Purdue takes a lead late, 43-40, and Illinois' David Olano kicks a 38-yard field goal to force overtime at 43, and then Purdue fails. They go for 2, I think, after the first touchdown in overtime.
Yeah.
Illinois gets a sack, escapes with that 50-49 victory over the Boilermakers. So a head-scratcher for sure. But we see these head-scratching results in college football when you least expect them. Sometimes the favored team even loses. But I typically, in these type situations, I give teams a mulligan, outside of an injury or some other extenuating circumstance. I'll give a team a freebie, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. And a lot of the reason for me taking the points with Illinois is Brett Bielema, the head coach of the Fighting Illini, now 15-7 as the betting underdog there in Champaign, and that includes 3-0 this year as the betting underdog. So he really has prospered in that role, and I think it's just a coaching advantage for Illinois. I like Bielema's experience. On the other sideline, you've got 38-year-old Sharon Moore, his first head coaching job. I think he's kind of learning on the job. And this is Michigan. This is only their second road game of the season. Before the bye, as you mentioned, they played at Washington and lost at Washington in that rematch of the national championship game. And after the bye, now playing their second straight road game. So I'll take this Illinois team to get the outright victory even, and I like those 3.5 points with the Fighting Illini.
Yeah, something I failed to mention, too, in that crazy Purdue, because I needed that one on my Moneyline Parlay that I released here at Bet Rivers, and it actually hit. But Ryan Brown was making his first start for Purdue At half, he had 9 yards passing. Second half and overtime, he had 288. I mean, this was the Purdue scored 40 points in the second half. Not in overtime, but just in third and fourth quarter alone. 40 points. This was a wild game, and they took the lead in Illinois. It was very late. I mean, just seconds to go. They were more than fortunate to get close enough to get a field goal and send it into overtime. So this was a wild. You talk about a blown lead. You talk about looking toward Michigan at halftime with that big lead against a quarterback who had thrown 9 yards. There was nothing Bielema that could say to get the attention of his team. Like you said, emotional mulligan in that spot. And, man, once you get that momentum going, those 18, 19, 20-year-old players, they don't realize once it gets going, it's very hard to stop. It was a wild game. That was, of all the college results last week and the style of play, that might have been the most unexpected, with Purdue scoring 40 points in the second half when the quarterback got 9 at halftime in his first start. All right, players can place same-game parlays on college football and NFL games to earn squares at BetRivers. Our exclusive Square Games offers additional chances at profit boosts, bonus bets, and many $10,000 jackpots. Visit BetRivers.com or the BetRivers app for more details. Let's get to game number 3, SEC game. The third Saturday in October, Alabama in Tennessee. Well, the league is trying to figure out scheduling, and Alabama-Auburn's going to be one, but Alabama-Tennessee is very close to a number 2. They go in this one, and Paul, you remember this line back in the summer? I believe Tennessee was the favorite in this game, being at home. Well, what you have here now at Alabama 2.5, 56.5 is 2 athletic quarterbacks, and one is 1 year further along in his development. Think of Jalen Milroe at this time last year. It was not pretty. And they really loved Nico at Tennessee, but only one start. That was the Iowa game, which he was more of a runner. And NC State was a fool's goal game. They are not what we thought they were going to be. And he threw 2 interceptions in that game. They were very sluggish offensively in their win, which they were a little bit fortunate against Florida. Graham Mertz knocked out for the season, the starting Florida quarterback, and they win that one in overtime. Come on, Sunbelt Billy. What you got to lose? Go for 2 in the fourth quarter when you score a touchdown. You're the dog on the road there. So Tennessee kind of failed their only test against a legitimate defense. Statistically, very impressive defensively. They're improved defensively. But Arkansas rolled up 434 yards on them last time out. So Bama, 2.5, 56.5. A lot of different things. But, man, that's a tough place to win when they're fired up like the way they are right now in Knoxville. That's going to be a tough place for Milroe in Alabama. But Tennessee's passing game is really struggling at this point.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, this one had the makings of a possible top 4 matchup. Alabama ranked number 1 in the nation, Tennessee number 4. The SEC road proved to be difficult, though, for these two teams back on October 5th. Alabama, of course, shocked at Vanderbilt 40-35 as a 23-point favorite. And as you mentioned, Tennessee fell to the Hogs in Fayetteville 19-14. So now both are pretty much fighting for their playoff lives. They certainly don't want to lose a second game here in mid-October. That would leave them in a pretty precarious situation. And I think both of these teams have had areas somewhat exposed in the season's opening half. Alabama clearly not playing at a championship level on defense, especially not in the back. In their last 2 games against Vanderbilt and South Carolina, the Tide's given up a total of 65 points, 792 total yards, an average of 5.6 yards per play. And that's not how they actually 5.4 yards per play. And that's not how they won, championships under Nick Saban. The defense is definitely not quite up to that standard. And then you have a Tennessee team. Of course, they weren't playing anybody, but in their first 3 games, I think they outscored those overmatched opponents 191-13. So they were really looking invincible at that point. But once the competition is ramped up and they've entered SEC play, Nico has not been quite quite up to that 5-star reputation. It's very early. It's not fair to act like he's a bust or anything like that. I mean, we have Cade Klubnik at Clemson is a great example. He didn't look all that great last year in his first year as a starter. Didn't look good against Georgia in the opener, but he's really made strides. He's clearly learning the position and starting to show his 5-star pedigree, and I'm sure Nico will do the same thing. But in his 3 SEC games, he's failed to reach 200 yards passing in any of those 3 games. They've only averaged 173.7 yards per game passing against Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Florida. And it just seems like the vertical passing game for Tennessee is almost, non-existent. And they're going to have to take off the training wheels, so to speak, at some point and try to push the ball down the field. I mean, college football, especially when you get in somewhat of a scoring match, you got to have explosive plays. You got to have those plays over 20 yards, and you can't get them all in the running game or on short passing routes. So they're going to have to start moving the ball down the field at some point. Got a slight lean to Alabama here, but it is going to be, as you mentioned, it's an afternoon game, but it is an orange out. Knoxville is going to be, Neyland Stadium will be rocking. So probably will pass here, but slight lean to Alabama.
Yeah, I like Tennessee a little bit here. That home crowd, man, I saw it make all the difference in the world in the LSU Ole Miss game, Arkansas, Tennessee, and some others. So I think it might calm down Nico in this one. It's and it's just Josh Heupel is so quarterback friendly with his system. And so, I mean, he's had 7 starts to this point. And man, let's face it, NC State was under. I know back in the summer it was 4.5. It was a 50-50 game with the split of the crowd in Charlotte. And it went up a little bit and they rolled. But he threw a couple of interceptions in that one as well. And that team, NC State's one of the bigger disappointments in college football this season. All right, let's get to the Big Ten. And when we looked at this one, a lot of people are looking at Nebraska and saying, man, if we can get to that Ohio State game undefeated, man, we got a chance to be undefeated with the Buckeyes coming to town. Well, the game before that's Indiana. Now it's Indiana that has this game to remain undefeated. And you have to look at their offense, and that's where they're really doing it. I mean, top 5 in points scored, top 5 in total yards per game, top 10 in third down percentages. And the Cignettis, it is. And the 2 quarterbacks that were doing it at smaller level schools that I had my doubts whether it could transfer to the Power 5 or Power 4 now. Leagues, and that is Curtis Rourke in Indiana and Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt. Come from New Mexico State and Ohio University. But it's for real, man. And even at a UCLA game, when I watched, I'm like, man, this looks really clean, the execution. I mean, everything that he's doing, we know he's a tough kid. Always been tough, but both of them are very tough. But Indiana, this was a game that Nebraska was favored back in the early time. Now Indiana is winning and covering a lot this year. Now they're 6.5 and 50 at home in Bloomington against Nebraska. Too many, though, maybe in this one, Paul?
I think it is. And I don't want to be Debbie Downer here on the success that both Indiana and Nebraska have had. But, first of all, what a difference a year makes. Last year, you look at these teams, both of them had losing records. Nebraska 5-7, Indiana 3-9. The Hoosiers only 2-9 against FBS teams. One of those victories over MAC bottom feeder Akron. These 2 teams were a combined 4-14 in Big Ten play last year. And just oddly enough, it just shows you college football in 2024. Both these teams have been favored in all of their games so far. And they've both played six games. Nebraska 5-1 with the home loss to Illinois. In Indiana, on the other hand, a spotless 6-0, playing at a very high level to this point. In Indiana's case, I think the turnaround underscores the impact of bringing in a new head coach. Kirk Cignetti has done a tremendous job. Brings in Curtis Rourke, the quarterback from Ohio, and also underscores the significance of not only Rourke, but other transfers that he brought in. I think he brought at least 9 players with him from James Madison. So brought a lot of talent with him. And, man, they have really done a great job to this point. In Nebraska's case, I think it signifies, the arrival of that true freshman legacy quarterback, Dylan Raiola, who's been mostly very good, very impressive in his maiden voyage, so to speak. And I think also the Cornhuskers clearly making strides in Matt Rule's second year there in Lincoln. I would be remiss, though, not to point out the scheduling component of these records. Indiana's schedule currently 114th by Jeff Sagarin. Nebraska coming in at 92nd. The highest ranked team, according to Sagarin, that Indiana has beat, Maryland at number 67. In Maryland, if you watched last Friday, they lost at home to Northwestern by 27 points.
Oh,
and again, not to be Debbie Downer, but so much of this is about scheduling. But Indiana's done everything that they could have done to this point. They've been tremendously impressive. But the road for both these teams gets tougher starting on Saturday when they face one another in Bloomington. I made this line Indiana -4. I really think these teams are pretty even. Indiana's schedule, both of their schedules not very strong, but Indiana's even weaker than Nebraska. So I made it 4. I thought, on a neutral field, they're virtually even. 6.5 just seems a little too juicy, seems like a little too many. So give me the Cornhuskers plus the 6.5.
I got a couple of theories of maybe why this line is inflated, because I think these are two even teams, maybe a home field, 3 points or so. In all due respect, Indiana, they're more excited. They're bringing fans everywhere. But they did come off of a bye. Nebraska does have Ohio State next week. Okay, they do have that trip. But I think it's more it's that not only the 6-0 straight up, but you talk about their lack of success in their power rating traditionally is driven so low, it has taken time for the odds makers to catch up with it. Now they've even inflated it on 13.5 on the road against Northwestern. They still covered. If you could get a line, which we saw some outlaw lines at 44.5 against Western Illinois, they're 6-0 against the spread, and it kind of not even close. The odds makers know those people that have been betting Indiana and got on that train, they're playing with the house's money. Mm-hmm. They're not leaving the blackjack table after they hit 6 blackjacks in a row.
That's right.
They're putting their money back on it. They know it. So I think that is driving that number up. I think this is a real close to even game, and I love the points in this one. And, yeah, this is a major step up in class. Matt Rule's team I'm worried a little bit about Ohio State next week, but don't you look ahead, look past Nebraska, Indiana a little less, being that they're undefeated. So I think that kind of captures their focus a little bit more. I like Nebraska in a big way, plus the 6.5, but with a game. But listen, Paul Stone, you ran marathons. When you're starving and little beggars can't be choosy, you just want a cup of water or Gatorade at the end of the race. You're not looking for a filet mignon with the creme brulee waiting on the side right after. Come on. Let the poor Hoosiers breathe. The frightened Wes Reynolds, let them go on this one. So we will see, but they are tickled pink in Indiana. And listen, part of it is coaching. That is a clean looking team, and he's got an interesting persona about him too. Kind of, he doesn't have a whole lot of loser mentality or excuses in his game. It's Ignetti, but going to be fun. Battle of Big Reds, but I think it's really, really tight. We both like the points in that one. Miami and Louisville, talking about some now some are schedule related, but my goodness, we're 6 games in now. They're 6-0, and well, should they be 4-2? A few calls along the way from the office in the ACC has helped them out in a big way. They're number 1 in the country in scoring at 48 points a game, 47.7 to be exact. They are number 1 in the country in yards per game. They are second in the country in third down percentage, 60%, and that's got a lot to do with Cam Ward as well. And boy, he has been really good, even in the waved off Hail Mary against Virginia Tech. He had to make a lot of plays in that game to keep them alive. He certainly had to make a lot of plays in Berkeley, down 25 in the second half. They get a week off after that Cal trip to kind of exhale, to regroup, and maybe tighten things up a little bit for their trip to Louisville. They're 4.5 and 60.5 at Louisville. Louisville had 2 Renner wins, and then the other 4 games, man, they are 0-4. I'm sorry, 1-3 against the spread. And they should be 0-4 because that Georgia Tech game, they were outgained by 100 yards. The block, scoop, and score, and the field goal attempt by Louisville put it over the number. This is an odd fact, too. The last 4 games for Louisville, the team that has led in total yards has lost the game. So Just an odd. You don't see that very often. But is Louisville a team that we built up, or are they going to finally kick it into gear because they're not performing at the level that maybe expectations we thought for them in this year? 4.5 and 60.5 at Louisville. Another little slippery slope here for the Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, I agree with you. First of all, Jimmy, Louisville has certainly been a mild disappointment to this point. There's no other way to put it. I think maybe the marketplace has, maybe they're a little bit inflated. I think there's a lot of respect for Jeff Brom as a head coach there as well. But Louisville's top two opponents, that they've played, they went to Notre Dame, hosted SMU, lost both those games. So they have not really, fired their best shot, so to speak. And I'm kind of counting on them to do that here. This is such a critical game for the Cardinals, could change the trajectory of their season. And if they lose it, I think things could kind of go spiraling downward on the other end of the spectrum. Meanwhile, after mowing through its first four opponents, Miami has found the going a little tougher. Has seen a little chinks in its armor, so to speak, in the last two games. As you mentioned, they defeated Virginia Tech and Cal in controversial fashion, narrowly defeating those teams, trailed both those teams by double digits in the fourth quarter. So really fortunate to win those games. Also, as you mentioned, though, coming off a bye week, Miami has had a chance to catch its collective breath, maybe heal some bumps and bruises, and maybe reflect on its recent close calls and try to get some things worked out there. But we are undoubtedly now seeing some vulnerability in the Hurricanes. And I really like this time of year when you get to mid-October, late October, early November, I really like looking at the underdogs and especially the home underdogs. I think you get some value there. One thing that I like about this game is although Cam Ward I think he was the one-time Heisman Trophy betting favorite. Now he might be the third or fourth choice. So he's still an excellent shot to make it to the ceremony there in New York City in December. But he was a little loose with the ball at Washington State, and that's kind of shown a little bit recently. They do throw the ball a lot, but he's thrown 4 interceptions in Miami's last 3 games. I really think the turnover battle, it's difficult to handicap. It's difficult to quantify, but it's a very critical part of the game. I think Louisville has a shot to, at least wash or maybe win the turnover battle there. And if they do that, their quarterback, Tyler Shuff, who also can be a little loose with the football, he's going to have to put his best foot forward, so to speak. But I think Miami's kind of hit a little bit of a lull. Louisville desperately needs a signature win. They don't have to win here, us getting 4.5 points. They just have to play a competitive game and keep it tight. I like Louisville plus 4.5 over Miami in the ACC.
Yeah, Cam Ward currently third choice at Bet Rivers at plus 650. Ashton Genty, the favorite at plus 200, has the week off. So this is probably a low spot for him because Dylan Gabriel leapfrogged Ward with that big win, and he was big in it at the against Ohio State. Well, an opportunity this week for Milroe on the road at Tennessee. Quinn Ewers, more importantly, at Texas, and Beck as well. Whoever wins that game is going to really climb the Heisman candidates as well. But they don't decide Heisman's in October. Those come in November. Some of those voters don't even watch the games till it gets much closer to the end of the season. For Paul Stone, I'm Jimmy Ott, looking at the high-profile games, the big games this week in college football. For Paul, I'm Jimmy Ott on the Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.